Welcome to today's book review. In today's session, I'm going to be reviewing what I consider to be perhaps the number one best-selling finance book of all times. I'm talking about no other than Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert T. Kiyosaki. A classic in its own right. A very interesting read. There have been so many reviews about the positive contribution that this book has made in various lives, and I don't think if I try to express my own personal thoughts in relation to the contribution it's had on me, I don't think I could do in the short time we have together. I just want to say that Robert has made a great contribution in writing this book. What the rich teach their kids about money that the poor and the middle class do not. That's the subtext. It's been an interesting journey, and I know a lot of people perhaps watching this who have read the book may relate to perhaps a lot of what I'm going to share in the next few minutes. What I love about Rich Dad, Poor Dad is simply that it's easy to read. It's a book that you can give to a 7-year-old and they can read it and understand it. It's also a book that you can give to a 67-year-old and they can read it and find value in the book. Robert tells of his journey, his story from childhood, and how the conflicting philosophies and opinions and beliefs that two men had about money and life and wealth, and how those conflicting beliefs shaped what I think is his destiny. Now, how does this, in its unique way, benefit the reader? Let's make this about the reader. I'll start by saying this. If you want to have an understanding, if you want to have a better understanding about why there is a big contrasting difference between those who are wealthy and those who are not, I think this book is a great place to start. And the reason is simply because, like the opening statement says, that the rich teach their kids something slightly different than the poor and the middle class. I grew up under the guidance of two great parents. We spiritually were rich. Financially, we had challenges. And in hindsight, looking back, I came to the realization that it came down to a simple principle. You can only give what you have. And so, to the various people watching all over the world, and to the various people who have always and often criticized either the education system or the people who raised them, or blamed their lack of financial understanding on others, I want to say something to you. People can only give what they had, and those who guided you and raised you gave you the best that they had. You have a responsibility now to accept where you find yourself, but now shape your destiny. You've got to let go of the history of your past and push forward towards the destiny that you've been given. And that starts by choice. That starts by recognizing that it's not where you are, it's not where you've been, it's where you're going. And this book gives you a map, a roadmap on how you can start right now, and you can start changing your life. You can change your future, you can change your destiny. It's not about looking backwards. The great writer says, forgetting the things that are behind me, looking neither to the left or to the right, I press towards the mark of a higher calling. I move towards my goal. So this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it's a book for anyone who wants to make a change in their personal financial circumstances. Anyone who wants to make a difference. Anyone who wants to live a better life. I personally believe that we all have been given life, and given life abundantly. And part of that abundance means that we should be able to live life on our terms. But to live life on your terms, one of the things you need is time and money freedom. You cannot experience the abundant life and the extraordinary life without both. You've got to get control of your life, and that begins by study. And by studying the Rich Dad Poor Dad, what you find is you learn some very specific lessons and principles and beliefs and strategies and philosophies about wealth and how you can start to change your destiny. Now, Robert starts the book in an interesting way. He talks about how he began his journey with a friend of his, which I believe is Mike. Mike was his friend. They went to school together. But what I found fascinating, like when I read a lot of books, I tend not to go for the theme of the book, really. Like the theme of this book is a focus on what the rich teach their kids and the poor don't. But I tend to go for the hidden gem, the hidden wisdom nuggets. And I love the section in the book where Robert says that his desire for wealth began from a conversation. So powerful. Your life can change from a conversation. As a matter of fact, you're one conversation away from what could connect all of the dots in your life. Now, Steve Jobs says you cannot connect the dots looking forward, but you can connect the dots looking backwards. You're one conversation away in most cases. You're one idea away. You're one thought away. You're one feeling away from creating that final piece that unlocks the puzzle of your greater life. This conversation that Robert had came in the form of what you might call a ridicule or an insult. He couldn't hang out, he couldn't spend time with some people because they said, you can't join us because you're poor. Now, most people would have heard that statement and shrug it off and just gone about living how they've always lived. If you're like me and you were raised in an environment that didn't have a lot of affluence, most people who are raised poor have accepted that this is their destiny and this is their faith and that this is predestined. But you see, success is not a matter of chance. Success is not a matter of luck. It's a matter of choices. You've got to make a decision. Now, the statement made to Robert had to do with some of his schoolmates who said, we have a new car, we're going to hang out in our new home with a few other people, but you can't join us because you guys are poor. Robert took that home to his father, and that statement, that conversation sparked a desire within him. The desire was that, how can I become wealthy? And his father was puzzled. Why do you want to become wealthy, son? And he said, because I couldn't play with some of the kids today because they said I was poor. So here is my question to you. You cannot change your life until you get to a point where you're unwilling to tolerate what you may have been tolerating for a while. Whatever you're willing to tolerate, you can't change. You have to have that desire. It's okay to be content with what you have, but never settle for contention. It's okay to have, I would always say, be happy with what you have whilst in pursuit of what you really want. You've got to keep growing. Now, that desire in Robert led him to ask his father, how can I make money? And that desire continued until they started an experiment. Obviously, the experiment didn't work. But guess what? They found through a different conversation. See, everything is all conversation. The power of conversation, I think, is greatly underestimated. Robert had tried to make money, was told not to proceed with it because it was counterfeiting. But his father then said, well, why don't you speak to Mike's father? Because Mike's father seems to have a lot of knowledge about money. And Robert and his friend Mike went to Mike's father to inquire on how to make money. They went and said, can you teach us how to make money, how to be wealthy? I thought that was remarkable for such level of insights and vision in young boys, 2 young boys. Now, the trouble me and you have can be captured in a statement made by Mike's father when they came to ask how they could learn and be taught. Mike's father said something to the nature of, I have so many employees, I think about 250 or something. And he said, none of them has ever come up to me and asked, can you teach me how to make money? And therein lies the secret. If you want to be wealthy, if you want to be successful, you have to have the desire for it. That desire must ignite something in you that pushes you into action, whereby you go seeking for more knowledge. Interestingly, the same traits shown are very similar to the richest man in Babylon. In The Richest Man in Babylon, at the start of the book, there were 2 friends, Bansia and Arcad. Bansia and Nomasia. Forgive me. Bansia and Nomasia. 2 friends. One of them had a dream. In the dream, he saw himself wealthy. In reality, he was poor. He woke up, he was dissatisfied because he had experienced, though in a dream, he had experienced what it would feel like to be wealthy. He had experienced giving wealth and money and sharing with people, and he loved it. So waking up to the reality that he still was poor sparked a desire in him, and through a conversation between Nomasia and Bansia, they came up to a conclusion that they had to go and seek for wisdom and knowledge, and they did that by going to Arcad, who was the wealthiest man in Babylon, and that's how their journey began. So in a strange way, Robert and Mike's journey began in the same way as Bansia and Nomasia. Mike's father started to teach them about money, and he gave them a number of lessons, about 6 or 7 or 8. I need to check and see. But a few lessons, basic lessons, and that led to obviously Robert writing the book and changing a lot of lives. I'll say this to you so you understand. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is an incomplete series. I didn't say it's an incomplete book. It's an incomplete series. Because when you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you recognize that there was so much Robert could have said that he couldn't share, because the book would have been just too big. Now, having read a number of his other books, there's a sequel. It doesn't follow exactly as though it's a sequel, but when you read the other books, you find out that there is a connection. To get the full picture, you've got to read this and then read the other books. And the reason is because in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he takes you into the journey of understanding the why. Understanding why, how they think. Then in a different series in the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, for example, I think I have another of Richard's book here. Increase Your Financial IQ. I think I must have a few of his other, maybe another book of his. But I think Increase Your Financial IQ should be read together with Rich Dad, Poor Dad for a number of reasons. Rich Dad, Poor Dad gives you an insight as to how wealthy people think and why they do what they do. The underlying factor there is why. Increase Your Financial IQ takes you a step further. It starts to show you how you can apply some of their strategies. It starts to show you what to do. So in Increase Your Financial IQ, they talk about, okay, how do you earn more? How do you protect what you've created? How do you budget what you've created? How do you leverage what you've created? And how do you increase your financial IQ? And Rich Dad, Poor Dad is teaching you about the basic beliefs and fundamental principles of the wealthy. Let's talk about some of those. The first chapter deals with a statement which in a lot of ways baffles a lot of people and baffled me when I heard it the first time. It says simply that the rich do not work for money. Now, if you hear that, you're probably thinking, that doesn't make sense. Then why do they keep trying to amass more wealth? I started applying a lot of the principles that I learned from various great authors, Robert being one of them, of course, and I can understand that statement. To achieve financial freedom, one of the things I had to do was I had to change my focus. I had to change my focus because, you see, 97% of the population work for money. Less than 3% have learned how to make money work for them. So the rich in the statement don't work for money is correct, because what they do is they work to acquire assets. Those assets are then used to generate income. They go for assets that appreciate in value, but also create income flow. So the key here is, by understanding the power of multiple sources of income, and by understanding the power of using money as a slave rather than you as the servant, one of the things you can do very quickly is let your wealth, whatever you've generated so far, work for you. Every pound you have, every dollar you have, every euro you have is like a servant. You've got to put it to work. So most people work and save. And I'm baffled by the fact that if for many people, we save and we put the money in our bank accounts and then we go to work. So we're working harder than our money, which is like a wrong equation. Your money has to be put on roller skates and get it moving, get it working, because the purpose of money is to create assets that generate more income, or the purpose of money is to have it converted into a different form of money, because currency alone is not money. The only form of money we have, gold, silver, commodities, and various other items are also money. But one of them is currency. So you've got to take your currency and keep it working. So the first principle in Rich Dad Poor Dad is, the rich, they don't work for money. They work to acquire assets. Interestingly, they use those assets and the income generated to then pay for their liabilities. Just a sound fundamental principle, which kind of makes sense. Let's move on, because you could tell I'm getting excited, and I want to be able to give you a rounded opinion before our time is up. The second chapter deals with the importance of financial literacy and why you have to become financially literate. And in this section, Robert is trying to explain the importance of having a fundamental understanding about accounting. You've got to be able to read the numbers. Part of the reason is because the numbers never lie. The numbers tell a story. So the biggest challenge that I faced, I'll use myself because I can relate to my examples, and it's much easier to talk about my mistakes and how I've overcome some of them, and I'm still overcoming the ones that I meet every day. But I remember a number of years ago, I was in debt. I was spending more money than I was earning because I was trying to keep up with the Joneses. But I was buying things that I thought were assets without understanding that there were liabilities. Now, this is so difficult to understand for someone of my, you might say, upbringing, because growing up, we had very little financial education at home. Most people get their financial education at home. The wealthy, the rich, they teach their kids what they know. They invite their kids into that world because they understand money. A lot of people say the love of money is the root of all evil, and that's incorrect. If you love money with your heart, yes. But if you use money with your head, then it doesn't become the root of all evil, because love comes from the heart, not the head. And the rich, some of them, not all of them obviously, the financially educated ones, recognize that business and investing, it's an intellectual game, it's an intellectual sport, it's not an emotional game. So they are very good at putting their emotions to one side and just dealing with their intellect, using their thinking. But for someone like me, for someone like me who didn't get a lot of financial education at home, my understanding was limited. So for example, if I bought a car, I thought a car was an asset. It was a shock to me when I realized that a car is a liability. A home, I thought, was an asset. I thought was something to be proud of. Yes, you should be proud of your home if you have one, but you've got to recognize that it's still a liability, because liabilities after the original capital investment spent on items or accessories or products, they depreciate in value. But in addition to that, they cause cash to flow away from you because they generate an expense. So a car, for example, every month was costing me money. If that car is on a loan, even worse. Same as a home. An asset, on the other hand, is an item, is an investment you make whereby after the original capital investment, the item, product, the service appreciates in value. And, but not always, it generates income. But the key thing is it appreciates in value. And so there were so many things I didn't understand. And so in this chapter, why you should increase your financial literacy is so that you can start to read the numbers. It was only until I started to understand the picture being painted by the numbers in my financial statements. Income, expense, asset, liabilities, and how money moves. Now, heaven's first law and nature's first law is order. So for most people, the first thing they have to understand is how to get their financial life in order. You do that simply by drawing a pictorial form of a financial statement. Income, expense, asset, liabilities, and assets. Now, when you've drawn that, you've given order to your financial life. You must now move to the second law, which is movement. Movement is sign of life. So in your financial life, you've got to look at the flow. That movement is money movement. Some call it cash flow. So financial literacy comes in from you being able to understand where the money is flowing from and where the money is flowing to. That's the key. That's something I had to learn. So in chapter 2, Robert is saying you have to increase your financial literacy. If you want to become wealthy, you have to learn how to read the numbers. You have to learn how to distinguish between what is an asset and what is a liability. But here is the point. There are good assets and there are good, believe it or not, there are good liabilities and there are bad liabilities. A home is a liability, but it's a good liability. If it's purchased in such a way that it appreciates in value, it might be costing you an expense every month, but if it's appreciating in value passively, without you doing any active measures, then that's still a good liability. There are good expenses, there are bad expenses. So it's understanding literacy and understanding the movement is such a beautiful concept. If you can read the numbers, you can understand the story. You can understand where things are going to, where they're coming from. Now, let's move to number 3. I love number 3, chapter 3. Mind your own business. You've probably heard that so many times. I remember growing up, whenever we had people around and perhaps my father and his friends or my mom and their friends were talking, there'll be maybe an occasion where someone says, mind your own business. In other words, get out from my space. I may be doing something that you don't completely understand, but it's me. And so in the Mind Your Own Business chapter, the concept is this. There's a difference between your job and your business. I'll give you a good example. I'm a chartered engineer by profession. I retired from engineering a number of years ago. Worked for about 15 years, designed sort of amazing buildings all over the world. That was my profession. But whilst I was working in engineering, I was working full-time on my job as an engineer, but I was working part-time on creating my fortune, on creating my future. I was working part-time as an investor. So my business was real estate because that was something I understood. I had the experience of buildings as a designer, creating or rather constructing grand buildings. So I knew the language, but also I loved the deal side of investing, particularly property investing or real estate. So my business was real estate. I understand it. My profession was engineering. So most people, when you meet them and you ask them, what's your business? They usually tell you their profession. A good example is the reference from Ray Croft when he went into an MBA program to talk to a number of young students, and they took him out for a drink. And after the time he spent teaching and sharing some ideas with them, they took him out for beers. And whilst he was there, he asked them a question, and this is captured in the book, of course. He asked them a question, what business am I in? And most of the people there laughed because it was too obvious. Obviously, you're McDonald's, you're into the hamburger business. But he shocked them when he said that that's not my business. He says, my business is real estate. And McDonald's is, I believe, today, perhaps the largest real estate owner. They own more land and property than, I won't be surprised if they own more than the Catholic Church, because I know the Catholic Church is probably in the top 2 or top 3. And this is the key. McDonald's had a really interesting concept. Every time they franchised, they made a decision to buy or acquire the land. A beautiful business plan. So we have a franchise, you want to buy my franchise, you come to me, we agree on terms, I take a percentage of what you make, but I choose the location, or rather you choose the location, you tell me where you would like to position it, I do my research, I buy the land, I buy the real estate, you lease the real estate from me, so you're paying for my investment, you're making me wealthy because you're paying for my debts, and I'm making a profit from you renting or leasing from me. In addition to that, your business operation and your trade is based on my franchise, so I'm taking a portion of what you have. So McDonald's over the year was acquiring real estate whilst operating a business. Amazing concept. And so in this section, Robert is saying, you've got to learn how to mind your business. In other words, recognize that your business, now here is the point. I used a reference to myself and I said real estate. But not everyone is investing in real estate. Some people have not even begun their investment journey. Someone will start their investment journey today. Some will start tomorrow. I started with nothing. The business that I'm referring to is not really the product. It's the seed. It's the seed that you begin with. So if you have £100, if you have $100, and that's all you start with, that's your business. You have 100 seeds. You have to mind that business, protect it, grow it, nurture it. You might choose to put that in a business someone else manages, but you have to make sure that you're minding that business well. You might put it in stocks, bonds, mutual funds. You have to manage it well. That's your business. You might put it in gold and oil and other commodities, or you might put it in real estate. The whole point is that you have seed. Every farmer has to protect their seed. So you see yourself as an investor. If you're saving, it's still your money. You still have to protect it. So your business is really what you have, what you own. But it goes beyond that it goes into what you've now invested in and what the investment is producing. So one of the most important things you must learn how to do is mind your business. You may be working for a company, you might be working in a job. However, your profession is what you do. Your business is what you take home. So if I go back to when I started my journey, every month, I had more days left at the end of the month than I had money left. I wasn't minding my business well because I had mismanaged my business. The key here is you have to learn the strategies and the secrets of the wealthy. I'll talk about some of that later on, but let me move further on and talk about a concept that I think is very important for the time we find ourselves. In the minding of your own business, Robert makes a distinction between the various types of emotions that you and I will have as we journey towards creating wealth. I made reference to a statement a few minutes ago when I said that investing in wealth creation is an intellectual game, not an emotional game. And many of us have the emotion of fear that control our decisions and our feelings and our actions. If you want to create wealth, you have to become great at emotional mastery. You've got to become really good at understanding and being able to read your emotions. You have to learn how to think from your emotions and not think with your emotions. The key here is this, it's a difference. By thinking with, you're reacting. By thinking from, you're responding. Responding means you're in control. If you react, something external is in control of you. If you respond, you're in control. But all of that comes through planning. If you want to be good at responding, you have to plan in advance. So you have to mind your business. Let's talk about one more and then I'll perhaps draw this to a close. My intention is not to tell you every single detail of the book. There's some work you have to do on your part. It's a relatively small book. I think anyone can read it very quickly. The next part I want to talk about, Robert mentions here, is the importance of financial intelligence. And he says here that there are a few things you need. You need accounting, you need investment knowledge, you need to know how to invest, you need to understand the market, demand, supply, when to buy, when to sell, when to hold, when to know that it's a speculated transaction or it's not based on facts, they're opinions. You've got to understand the market. You've got to understand trends. And finally, he says you've got to understand the law. You've got to understand taxes. And you've got to understand history. Because all of these give you financial intelligence. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Here is the point I'm trying to make. The 4 points that I've just referred to, which are technical skills that you need, are, in my opinion, essential if you're going to create, multiply, maintain, and pass on your wealth. He now goes into the detail in his next book, Increase Your Financial IQ. Because you see, when he talks about accounting and law, you've got to start understanding that, for example, here in the UK, in London, and other parts of the UK, we have different taxation grades depending on how much you earn. Good example, someone who perhaps earns, say, £90,000 will be in what we call the 45% tax bracket. It's graded, it's calculated in a unique way. It doesn't mean that 45% of what they earn immediately is taxed or paid off as tax. There's a certain allowance, usually 11,000, and then you cascade the rest. You pay 25%, 20% on a certain portion, and then you pay 45% on a certain portion. But the point is this: someone who is earning, say, £90,000 will perhaps, on average, go home with maybe about 67,800, something like that. Someone else who is more financially intelligent can also make £90,000 and pay zero taxes if they understand the laws and if they understand taxation. The difference being that one person is working as an employee, working for money. The other person could be working as a business. So they can afford to apply a simple logic that is acceptable in most countries. An employee pays their taxes first before they spend. The laws are set up in such a way that for a business, the business is allowed to pay all of their expenses, and then whatever they have left, they pay taxes on that. So it's understanding the loopholes, in other words, understanding the rules of the game. There's just a lot of great content in here that it's difficult for me to capture everything in a short period. I like a section in the book where he gives a really simple philosophy about how to live and still create wealth. He says, first, buy assets. The key to creating wealth is buy assets first. Income generating and assets that appreciate in value. That's the key. If you want to be wealthy, that's all you have to do. You must now discipline yourself to minimize your liabilities and your expenses. As a matter of fact, if you minimize your liabilities, your expenses somewhat reduces as a result of reducing your liabilities. But by reducing your liabilities and buying assets, you give yourself a great opportunity to create wealth. But here is another point. If you must buy liabilities, then let your liabilities be paid for by the income created from your assets. Powerful concept. I'll conclude with this example. Let's say you want to buy an Aston Martin, the new, perhaps DB9. You go into the shops and they tell you it's 111,000. You have the money to pay for it, but you recognize that it's a liability. You have two options. Number one, you pay for the car, you drive out, and every month you have the upkeep. The problem with that is with cars that depreciate in value normally, predominantly I should say, with the exception of some vintage cars. If I bought the car and I drove the car off the lot, if I drove just down a minute at the traffic lights, I turned around and came back and said, here are the keys, I changed my mind. Within that 2-minute period, I would have lost more than between 18 and 25,000 pounds of the value of that car. The car that I bought for 111,000 pounds, I probably would only be able to get it back for maybe 92,000, something in that region. And that's how powerful liabilities depreciate in value. So Robert is saying, another strategy might be, and this is a wealthy person's perspective, they take that 110,000 pounds, or 11,000 pounds I should say, and they find an investment to put it in. They invest it wisely using leverage, for example. So as a good example, if I was going to invest in real estate, if I had 111,000 pounds, I can go up to the bank and say to the bank, I've seen a property worth 444,000. I'd like you to join me as a partner. I'll bring 111,000 and I want you to give me the rest. The bank will say, fine. The bank brings up 300 and plus thousand. With that, I add it, I've got a 400,000. I buy an investment. The investment starts to generate an income, for example. By the time I paid off all of my expenses from the investment, I still have a profit. If, for example, that profit is reasonable, I could then use the profit to maybe lease the Aston Martin, or I can perhaps just hold on to the property for year one, After the end of year 1 and year 2, I can pull out my original capital of 111,000. I can take any appreciation in the property. I can use that together as a down payment for another property. So I can choose to wait for 3-4 years, and maybe at the end of the 4th year, I can now pull out £111,000 plus any extra to cover inflation to buy the Aston Martin. Now, it would have been a delayed purchase, but that's okay. Wealthy people are not really into instant gratification anyway. But here is the most important part. In that period, maybe I would have acquired 3 properties. They are still mine. So I can have my properties, my assets, and still have my liabilities. Now compare that against someone who couldn't delay gratification and simply purchased the car immediately. I'm not suggesting one is right and one is wrong. Shakespeare said that nothing is either right or wrong, but your thinking makes it so. All I'm saying is if your desire is to become wealthy, then you've got to understand how the wealthy think. And then decide whether you think it's a lifestyle that you can live by. Now, that's all I'm going to talk about. Again, the book is Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert T. Kiyosaki. Like I said, it's a great book. I will say this as I conclude. We're saturated with information. I bet you for a fact, and I believe this with great conviction, if you randomly asked a group of people who and how many of you have read this book, you'd be surprised at how many people have read the book. What I find puzzling is, like in any area of our life, we know what to do, but we don't do it. And that's the key and the strategy and sadly the saddest part of what we call our experiences. We know what to do, so many have read this book, but very few have actually applied the principles in the book to the point where they are financially free. So my recommendation is, don't just read the book. Do it. Do what the book suggested you do. Read the book more than twice. Give yourself some time between each read, perhaps 6 weeks, perhaps 4 weeks. But I think in order to understand and appreciate the content of the book, you have to read it more than 3 times. And as you read more and more, you start to find a lot more level understanding and awareness on your part that can help you create the life that you want. The life is good. The price is somewhat dear. To find success, you and I have to pay a price. The price must be paid every day, and it must be paid in advance, and the price is due every single moment. So, as you go away, understand that the book will make a huge difference in your life. But let it not just be intellectual. The evidence that you understand anything is to be able to look at your personal life and see the results of applying the principles. Don't just study the philosophies of the wealthy. You've got to learn their habits. You've got to now apply their habits and live their lifestyle. That's how you achieve your dreams and goals. I want to wish you the best of luck, and I hope you find something, one idea perhaps, that can help you live a much more fulfilling life. Take care.